So in today's video, we are talking about fear. And this is something that a lot of people talk about in the conscious community, but they kind of use like airy-fairy words with it. And they're like, oh, try to access your fear and you gotta feel it to heal it and all of these things. But there aren't really tangible tools for people who aren't super involved in an alternative new age community.
We wanted to break it down and make it pretty simple and share what that looks like to us and what it sounds like to us, and hopefully give people an opportunity to get to know their fear personally.
So a few weeks ago, Katie and I were reading Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And in Big Magic, Elizabeth talks about how on the creative journey, she has her level of creation, her creativity, and then she also sort of has this backseat driver that's always there, which is actually her fear. And the fear tries to keep her from allowing the creativity to come through. But what she realized that led to a lot of breakthroughs was that she had to include her fear on the journey. And she uses this great analogy of taking a road trip. And that if you want to engage your creativity and take it on the road, you have to include your fear. So even if it's in the back seat, you have to sort of welcome it into the picture and know that it's going to show up and plan for that and know that it's not going to derail you, but that it's still going to show up. So when we were reading this book, we started talking about fear, and Katie had this great realization come through.
So I realized that, same with what you were saying, that you can't ignore your fear. You need to invite it in and you need to befriend it. And you also, on that same note, you need to let the fear know that you're in charge and that you're the one calling the shots. You're okay with the fear being here. You're completely accepting that the fear is going to come with you wherever you go. But there was this download that I got that I thought to myself, what if we got to know our fear as if it was a character in your story? A little bit like that movie Inside Out, for anyone out there that has children. Each emotion was a character. And I thought to myself, I feel as if I could sit down with my fear, who is a 13-year-old insecure 8th grader, who will show up usually when I'm about to embark in something really wonderful and creative and beautiful. She shows up, she's crying, she's sad, and she is there telling me that I'm not enough, that I'm gonna let everybody down, that I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have what it takes to move forward in what it is I want to do. And with that, I went down a journey of not just looking at the 8th grade self, but looking at my sadness, looking at my anger, looking at my fear, and giving them names, giving them identities.
And so Katie and I are both coaches, and we talked about how powerful this could be if we worked with our clients around naming the characters in our stories. But we knew that before we could bring any of this to our clients, or even to you, that this was something we really had to sit with personally. So we have spent a solid couple of weeks getting really comfortable with the characters, well, getting comfortable and uncomfortable with the characters in our story. And we have both found it extremely beneficial. So we want to share a little bit about some of the characters in our own stories, because we think that that might help you identify some of your own characters.
So my fear's name, it's the most uncomfortable emotion that I deal with in my adult life, and I often want to run away from it. So I thought, what better way to get to know her is give her a really beautiful name. And I love the name Penelope. If I would have had another daughter, I would have named her that. And I thought to myself, if I could just give her a really beautiful name, then I'm going to want to sit with her, and I'm going to want to talk to her, and I'm going to want to listen to what she has to say. So I named her Penelope. What about you? What did you name yours?
So it took me a while to figure out my fear's name. And I actually realized that my fear doesn't just show up as fear, but that this side of myself that sort of is like my negative internal dialogue, which is also related to my fear, is actually what I refer to as my shadow side. And I'm pretty big on embracing your shadow side as a woman and what that means within your femininity, but each of us has a shadow, and the shadow is basically your unconscious self. That's what Carl Jung refers to as your shadow. And so I realized that my fear was really a manifestation of my shadow self. Mm-hmm. And I have a pretty big connection with ravens, and they have to do with darkness and shadows. And so I named my shadow self Raven, and she is the side of me that shows up whenever there's any sort of fear or negativity or limiting belief. So she shows up for me in work when I feel like I'm not good enough or I can't make it happen. And she shows up a lot with me personally, with my body and my health and my energy, because my energy is really connected to my feminine cycle. And so that, if I have really low energy, that affects my work. And then if my physical body is affecting my work, I feel like I'm not good enough because my body is limiting me from sharing my mission with the world. And it's like well, my body's keeping me from doing this thing, but it's all connected. Like it's all the same thing, mm-hmm. but it manifests in all these different parts of my life. And so I've been working a lot with Raven. We are getting really cozy. But I loved that, Katie, you shared with me about how you found out about Penelope and where she shows up for you in your life. So you want to share a little bit more in detail about like the age that Penelope really showed up for you and how that age continues to show up and manifest in your life?
Absolutely. So what's interesting about our psyche is I'm a 35-year-old woman, you're 31, and we're operating as adult women. But what happens is when we are maybe going through struggles, like you said, all of a sudden this shadow self, this fear will show up, and it becomes really uncomfortable and it becomes very distorted. And it gets really confusing because you think to yourself, wait, no, like I'm good. I've done all this work. I'm able to show up with my job, being a mother, with my coaching, with my friendships. And when Penelope showed up for me this last go around after we were reading Big Magic, I realized that I had ignored her most of my life. When she was here, I would turn my back on her as if it was a child trying to say something to me, and I would turn my back on her. And after I did this work with her, I realized that all she wanted me to do was sit with her and wrap my arms around her and tell her that everything was going to be okay, that she isn't alone, that I'm here to listen, I'm here to comfort her. And there was this moment where after I started doing that, everything calmed down in my system. And I was able to tell the difference between Penelope and myself. And there was this beautiful relationship that occurred. And I was able to hold space for her and listen to her and listen to everything that she'd been trying to tell me, that she was scared, that she was alone, that she didn't feel like there was anyone to comfort her and tell her everything was going to be okay. So that's why she kept showing up. She just kept presenting herself.
And that started when you were how old that you actually had those feelings?
Around 13, about 7th, 8th grade, middle school. We all love middle school, don't we? Such a beautiful time. Everyone's so kind and
confident,
accepting. Yeah, so about 8th grade.
And so those feelings kept presenting themselves to you over and over and over and over again because they wanted recognition and Absolutely. They wanted to be healed. But because fear is so uncomfortable, it's something that we avoid mm-hmm. and we suppress. And Katie used the word distortion. And I'm a really big believer in the fact that suppression leads to distortion. And that is true for every part of your life. So whether you're suppressing your fear, or you're suppressing your sexuality, or you're suppressing any desires you have, that is going to lead to a form of that suppression is going to lead to distortion. And so that suppression of that 13-year-old self that Katie's talking about was slowly distorting her relationship with herself and the experiences you were actually having every day in your life. But it's not because you are showing up as you, the Katie you are now. You are showing up as that distorted 13-year-old version of yourself from back then.
Well, and she would show up when I felt like I did something wrong. So my big trigger was maybe I didn't show up for a friend the way I wanted to. Maybe when I was dating, that guy didn't call me back. Whatever it may be, it was always usually when something didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and I was attached to that outcome, or there was some kind of disappointment, or I just wasn't as good as I would have liked to be. She would present herself, and instead of honoring who I am and where I'm at and all the work I've done and how well I do show up every day in my life, I would go into the story, and Penelope would start running the show. And I couldn't find my voice, myself now. It was Penelope that was showing up. She was front and center. And when I would feel that in my body, it just felt so uncomfortable. And because of all the work I've done, I actually can't suppress it anymore because of the journey of moving, doing this work to heal. So I'd like to hear more about the shadow self and about what Raven looks and sounds like in your story.
With Katie's help, because best friends often point out the things that you don't want to hear, I realized that Raven had to do with my 10-year-old self, and I had a very traumatic childhood, and I ended up losing my mom when I was 10, and up until that point, because my childhood, I was moved around so much, and so much was happening to me on energetic and emotional levels all the time. I never really had time to sit down and do kid stuff and get good at something. I didn't have anything that I would really love to do, or that I was a skill or a sport or something that I really excelled in. And also because of my childhood, school was really, really, really hard for me. I had to work really hard. I would come home in middle school and high school with a C, and my family, they were so proud of me because they knew how hard I worked for that C. And I would literally come home with my report card and be like, I got a C. and so there's this level of difficulty for me that things have to be hard. And that's really when Raven showed up, was that things have to be hard and I'm not going to be able to do it. That was really my trigger, is that I can't do it, that I'm not going to be able to figure it out, that I'm not smart enough. And that, now with how it shows up with my body, sort of with my body's rhythms and cycles, affecting my energy levels and my creative output, that's another manifestation of I can't get whatever I wanted to finish done. And so I really recognize that Raven is the voice in my head that creeps in whenever I actually, I've actually realized that Raven has some intense wisdom, and that she shows up for me whenever I'm actually coming out of alignment with myself. So at work, she shows up. If I'm putting my nose to the grindstone a little too hard and I'm about to burn out my body, she will show up as a messenger saying, hey, let's stand up and walk around and get outside for a few minutes and reset so that you can come back fresh for this. Because if I don't, I'm not going to be able to get through what it is I need to get through, just because that's my brain and my biochemistry, and that's how my body works.
So your fear, she helps you. She's helpful.
She's very helpful, and she actually is just trying to get me to listen to what I need more. And so my shadow side is not this negative, dark, scary thing, although there are some painful parts of everyone's shadow side that need attention and healing. If we think about our lives as a spectrum of darkness to light, it's all the same spectrum. So, good, bad, whatever it is, it's all connected. Right. And she's just trying to get me to stay more on the equilibrium point. And because our society doesn't really value things that are really necessary for living as a holistic being. Like even recognizing death, like we kind of pretend like death doesn't happen, and we don't really engage in it in some of the ways that Eastern societies continue to do, and that Aboriginal societies have done for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which gives you this really holistic perspective of what life is. So there is life, there is death, and there's times of like extreme movement and creation, and there's times of stillness and rest. And so I feel like for me, Raven really is that messenger of helping me navigate, like when I do go further down into the dark side of, whether it's like my energy gets depleted or I'm not feeling good about myself, she comes in to try to wrangle me back in to get further into the light. But because our society doesn't really give us tools to recognize these parts of ourselves that aren't always happy and positive all the time, it's really hard to identify that.
So with that, when Penelope has shown up in my life as of today, what I'm learning from her is, yes, I could go back to the 8th grade self where I didn't feel worthy enough and I didn't feel good enough. That was because I was giving my power away to other people. I was letting other people tell me what my worth was. And so what I've learned sitting with Penelope and having conversations with her is that was my old programming. So when I got scared or nervous, I would go back to that story and I would agree with her. I would take on her mentality and say, you're right, I can't do this, I'm not enough. And right now, what I've learned and the beautiful wisdom I got from Penelope is that is my old story, and that my new story is that I believe within my heart and soul I have everything that I need and all the tools I need to move forward in my creativity and in my story with love, with work, with motherhood. And there was this moment where all of a sudden it flip-flopped, and now Penelope is understanding my point of view. And it's not me. I'm not trying to figure out what her point of view is anymore. Now we have this clear understanding, and now when she shows up, I just put my arm around her and I just tell her everything's gonna be okay and that I've got this. And I'm able to stand more fully in my truth of who I am now with the work that we've done together, Penelope and I. So it's been really beautiful, and I feel really grateful for this connection to myself, to this character in my story. And that I hope moving forward, as I spend more time with my sadness, my anger, I thought about maybe naming anger Veronica, because it just seems like a sassy name.
She seems a little edgy.
She's just a little edgy, a little sassy. And I look forward to just getting to know them and learning what it is they've been trying to tell me all along. So with that.
Yeah, I love that. Katie and I talk a lot about reprogramming.
Yes.
And so this is something that's been great for us because it's great to have awareness around something, but in order to actually bring change into your life, there does have to be reprogramming. You have to sort of reapproach how you deal with whatever's coming up for you.
And you need to so with with what we do in coaching, with what I do is you have to be introduced to your programming. You have to have a full awareness and a full understanding to why you're programmed the way that you are before you can start grabbing new tools and implementing them into your new life.
Exactly, which is a huge point because a lot of people in the coaching or in the self-help world don't touch on that. They don't bring full awareness to how you have become who you are.
Why and whom and what you are.
And sometimes people do that. But it becomes more of a crutch because then you just go down the rabbit hole with all of these bad or negative or hard things that have ever happened to you. And so I think it's really important when you start to look at your story and you start to look at the characters in your story to have awareness and not judgment. Because if you're able to look at it from a place of awareness, there's an amount of curiosity that comes in with awareness instead of judgment is when you have attachment to something. And so allowing yourself to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, getting to know the characters in your story without having it spiral you down like into depression or whatever your habit or your trigger may be.
And it's safe to get to know your character because it's just you
and
yourself. And some people get scared to do that work and they don't want to share that story with other people, a therapist or a friend, and hopefully they have a best friend like you. And knowing that it's safe to get to know these characters,
and that it might be hard. Like you might have emotions come up. You might have anger. You might have fear.
So many emotions.
You might have sadness. You might be really surprised about what comes up. Mm-hmm. Like being okay with what arises, but not getting stuck in it.
Mm-hmm. And as a friend, really looking at it as your best friend.
Yeah.
So we can loop this back to having conscious talks with your best friend. Really spending time with your emotions and your characters is you becoming your own best friend. Yeah, look at that.
That's so beautiful.
It is. Good job.
So your homework for the week is to get to know the characters in your story. So you can do this by journaling, you can do this by meditating, you can do this by sketching and drawing. One of Katie's clients did that and it was a great experience for her. Get to know the characters in your story, see how they show up for you in your life, and then with the reprogramming, be aware of how they show up and what they're trying to teach you.
Mm-hmm. And ask them questions. Spend time with it. Know that it might take more than a day, maybe a couple days.
It might take a month.
It might take a month.
It might take a year.
Be kind to yourself and know that healing is not an overnight process and it is not instant gratification. But in the end, I promise you that you will come out with more wisdom and more love for yourself.
We hope that this was valuable for you. If you like this video, please share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time on Conscious Talks.
In love and gratitude.
#Conscious
Talks. Next time, let's do iced tea.
Yes.